There are certain moments that don't feel wrong at first. They don't stand out immediately, they don't make you panic or question anything right away, but later, when you replay them in your head, something about them doesn't sit right. Something feels off in a way you can't explain, and the more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Not because of what happened, but because of how normal it seemed at the time. Tonight I'm sharing 5 true encounters that only got worse the more I thought about them. The kind of experiences that don't scare you instantly, but stay with you long after they're over. The first one happened during my morning commute. I take the same route every day, so I notice when something is different. One morning, while waiting at a traffic light, I saw a man standing on the corner across the street. Nothing unusual about that at first, except the way he was standing. Completely still, not looking at his phone, not looking at traffic, just staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it until the light turned green and I drove past him. As I passed, I glanced over and noticed his eyes were following me, not just turning his head slightly, but fully locked onto me. And even that wouldn't have been strange except for the fact that he didn't blink. Not once. I kept driving and forgot about it until the next day when I stopped at the same light and he was there again in the exact same spot. Same posture, same stillness. This time I paid closer attention, and again when I drove past, his eyes followed me the entire time. It felt intentional, like he was waiting for me specifically. Over the next few days, it kept happening. Always the same time, always the same position, and every time I passed him, he would look directly at me without blinking. I started leaving earlier thinking I would miss him, but he was still there. Then I tried leaving later, and somehow he was still there too. Like he wasn't tied to a time, but to me. Eventually, I decided to take a completely different route, one that didn't pass that intersection at all, and for a few days everything felt normal again, until one morning I stopped at a completely different traffic light miles away from the original location and saw him standing on the corner. Same posture, same stillness. And as I drove past him, he slowly turned his head and looked directly at me again. That was the last time I saw him, but I still think about how he got there. Now, the second encounter happened late one night when I was home alone. I was in my room scrolling on my phone when I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It just said, "Are you awake?" I didn't respond at first because I assumed it was a wrong number, but then another message came through saying, "I can see your light is still on." That made me pause. I looked around my room instinctively, even though I knew no one was there. I went to the window and looked outside, but the street was empty. I responded asking who it was, but there was no reply. A few minutes later, another message came through saying, "You just stood up." That's when I felt a real sense of unease. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing, and there was no way someone could have seen me unless they were very close. I turned off my light and stayed still watching my phone. And then another message appeared saying, "Why did you turn the light off?" I didn't respond. I just sat there in the dark trying to listen for any sounds outside, but everything was silent. Eventually the messages stopped. I blocked the number and didn't think much of it after that until the next day when I checked my call log and saw that the number that messaged me had no record of existing. It wasn't saved anywhere, and when I tried searching it, nothing came up. The third encounter happened while I was staying at a hotel for work. It was a fairly standard place, nothing unusual. I checked in late and went straight to my room. Everything seemed normal. I locked the door, set my things down, and got ready to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up suddenly without knowing why. The room was completely dark except for a faint light coming from under the door. I assumed it was the hallway light until I noticed something strange. The light was moving, not flickering but shifting slightly like something was passing in front of it. I sat up and watched it for a few seconds, and then I heard a soft sound from the other side of the door, like someone dragging their hand across it slowly. I stayed completely still, listening. The sound continued for a few more seconds and then stopped. I got out of bed quietly and walked toward the door, but before I reached it, the light disappeared completely, leaving the room in total darkness. I didn't open the door that night, I just went back to bed and tried to ignore it. The next morning, I checked the hallway and there was nothing unusual. No marks on the door, No signs that anyone had been there. But when I checked out later that day, I asked the front desk if anyone had been in the hallway during the night, and they told me that entire floor had been empty except for me. The fourth encounter happened when I was visiting a friend. We were sitting in his living room late at night talking when we both heard a noise come from the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. We stopped talking and listened, but there was no follow-up sound. After a few seconds, my friend got up to check and I followed him. When we got to the kitchen, everything looked normal. Nothing out of place. We checked the counters, the floor, the cabinets, but there was nothing that could have made the noise we heard. We went back to the living room and sat down again. But a few minutes later, it happened again. The same sound from the same direction. This time we didn't go immediately. We just sat there listening, and then we heard something else, a soft movement like something being shifted slowly across the floor. We looked at each other and then back toward the kitchen. Neither of us said anything, but we both knew something wasn't right. Eventually, we went back to check, and again, there was nothing there. No explanation for the sound, and that's when my friend said something that made it worse. He told me that this had been happening for a few weeks. Always at night, always from the kitchen, and he had never found anything that could explain it. The last encounter is the one that bothered me the most because it felt the most personal. It happened while I was sitting in my car, parked outside my house late at night. And I had just gotten home, but I stayed in the car for a few minutes checking my phone before going inside. Everything was quiet, the street was empty, and then I noticed someone standing on the sidewalk a short distance away. I hadn't seen them walk up. They were just there, standing still, facing in my direction. I couldn't make out their face because of the darkness, but I could tell they were looking at me. I waited for a moment expecting them to move or walk away, but they didn't. They just stood there. After a few seconds, I turned my attention back to my phone, trying to ignore it. But something made me look up again, and when I did, they were closer. Not dramatically closer, but enough that I could tell they had moved without me noticing. I locked my car doors and watched them, still no movement, just standing there. And then slowly they started walking toward me, not fast, not aggressive, just a steady pace. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I started the car and drove away. I didn't go inside that night. I drove around for a while until I felt like it was safe to go back. When I finally returned, the street was empty. No sign of anyone. And I went inside, quickly locking the door behind me. I never saw that person again. But what stayed with me was how they appeared without warning and moved without me noticing, and how normal it felt at first until it didn't. And that's what all of these experiences have in common. They don't feel like anything at first. They don't seem dangerous or even unusual, but the more you think about them, the more they start to fall apart, the more you realize that something about them doesn't make sense. And maybe it never will. Because sometimes the most unsettling things aren't the ones that are obviously wrong, but the ones that almost feel normal, just not quite enough to ignore.